Okay, and we are back. So I went to get a candle, and I broke. See that, an old candle, one just white candles like that. Broke a piece off, and then now I'm gonna try to replicate that surface. So let's try here next to this drawing before we do that, right? So I want to find the right texture, see if it works. So I kind of gently rub the wax. I broke it so that it kind of has a point, and you can be a little bit more precise as you do this, right? So now I put my wax in there. Of course, you're not going to see it, and then I want to replicate that beautiful orange, right? So let's see. All right, looks good. Now where did I put it? Right. All right. See the paint will not stick when I put the wax. See the difference between wax and non-wax. So look, that looks a little bit coarse, you know. So I gotta be, I guess, careful in being very light and not put too much wax down, right? But you see how we can kind of start imitating a little bit that texture. Of course, that is much finer. I don't even know if you see it, guys. Yeah, maybe you don't see it from the video, but depends on the light. But I want to try to replicate that texture. So I'm going to make this a little bit less, much lighter, right? Just a little bit. So I'm using now cold press, because cold press paper has some texture, and that will help me in creating that roughness of the texture of the pepper. All right, it might be okay like that, right? Let's see what we can do now with the pepper here, right? Keep it really carefully just in the area that needs that shimmering effect, right? Very carefully, don't push it too hard. Hopefully it will work. Of course, there are other methods for doing this, but I just wanted to show you one method to obtain texture, right? I could even scrape it. In fact, I might even go scrape it later with a blade. So I'm going to stay lighter. I'm going to begin lighter. Because I want to be able to develop gradually the color, because in some areas that orange is lighter, some area is darker. So I want to be able to replicate that those various hues that we see in that pepper, right? Here. Yeah, going to the market sometimes like this. You see something, ooh, nice, like the classic impulse buy, right? But they're so pretty. I don't really know what I'm gonna do with these. I have a whole bag of these, and like a pound, and I gotta figure out something, right? All right, we'll think about that, right? Okay, so now I want to leave it alone and dry a little bit, and then now I'm going to I'm going to work on, actually I could, see this area here is darker here, right? So I could put in a little bit darker color here. Not much, actually, you know what, I'm gonna wait because I don't want that to go all over the place, right? Okay, so let's now work on that. So this one in here, I want to try to achieve the highlight. The highlight I see might be different from the highlight you see. Actually, now I even turned the pepper like that. So, but it's just a question of understanding how, yeah, what's happening with the pepper here. It was this way, right? More or less here. So they're gonna be different from what I see. So be patient with that and just try to understand the concept, how I apply the light and so on. So in this case, I am going to leave the highlight white and paint around them. So that color, this red, is really not cool. It's fairly balanced. So let's see. That could be a good color to start with, right? So now I'm going to block in the first wash, and as I see the highlight, I'll leave them alone wherever I see them, right? Again, they might be different from the highlight you see because I'm looking at it from a slightly different angle of the camera, and my cell phone. So so don't say, oh, what is he doing? What is painting? I don't see that, right? Okay. So we can do these highlights two ways, right? One way is paint around that, and the other way is lift it, right? So when I paint around it, though, in this case I don't see super sharp margins, so I'm gonna dry the brush, take off the paint, and then after having it clean, I want to soften those margins because I don't really see a super sharp margins pretty much anywhere, right? So that soft margin will give it a glow. See, that will give the pepper a glow. Okay. And the other way I could do it is lift. So go with the dry brush here and try to lift a little bit of the paint, 2-3 passages, because the paint is still wet, and this paint is not non-staining. So if I were using a staining pigment, it wouldn't come off as easily. So it would be a little bit hard, actually much harder to take off the paint. But this is non-staining, and it has also a fairly coarse pigment. All pigment are ground to different level of fineness. I don't know. It's small, different micron size. They go down to micron size, and each pigment is going to be ground differently depending on the characteristic of the pigment. So some pigment can be ground very, very finely, and some other pigment less finely. Some pigment are heavier and settle down fast and quickly, and they create little puddles and islands of pigment, of color, creating this little pattern, right? Other pigments are so light that they disperse evenly and create a very, very even wash, right? So now going back to, let me see, maybe a little bit more here. So this in between, this should be a little bit darker, right? So now I'm working wet on wet, as you see, because I want my paint to spread gently, right? And I can also darken all this side here. So this margin in here, because the light comes slightly from this direction, is going to be, the shadow is going to be wider, bigger, right? Because this is a whole nother plane here. This side in here, instead, the shadow line is going to be very, very thin. It's just on the edge. Like that, right? So if I have a highlight in here, this kind of turns down, so maybe here it's also a little bit darker here, right? And then now what I do, now that I had kind of hinted a little bit at the volume of my pepper, I want to wait a little bit, and let's go see if we can work on that. It should be dry. I have a little bit of coarseness there, not a lot, so I will eventually go back with a little blade and try to scrape off some of the paint to create that shiny effect in there. So now I see this margin in here, it's darker here, right? Actually, it could be all of it in a darker color like this. Not that much. There you go. And I'm gonna paint around the seeds, right? You could also put some masking, liquid masking on the seeds, but it's kind of annoying. I mean, you can do it, right? It's I've done it many times, but I don't want to. Let's look at that technique at another moment, right? Another lesson. It's called liquid frisket, and it comes in little jars. Mr. Newton makes a very good one, but you cannot really leave it there for long because it might stick to the paper too much, and then when you take it off, it peels the paper, and so you know, you want to be careful in using that, right? So you got this pepper here, getting close to the color, but not completely, because I will need more red. You know, see, that is a little bit more red. Okay. So in the meanwhile, I could work on the stem, and is kind of a pale, very pale, cool yellow undertone there, so I could put the yellow pretty much everywhere here, right? And then I'm gonna layer the green over it gradually, right? But that is almost white at that point, right? But that is a very, very, very pale kind of yellowish color. So let me try to replicate that. It has a glow, see that? This little glow here, right? So maybe I went a little bit overboard with the previous class, you know, a bit too much stuff, but I wanted to show you the process, right? Again, I'm you know, usually I cannot finish this work because it would take time to do them precisely. So I just want to show you the process, how to go about painting these, right? So you see how the granularity of this paint is different from that. That is somewhat finer. Is subtle difference. That's really that paint, right? And each brand will have same color. For example, if I buy alizarin crimson from Blocks, and I buy alizarin crimson from Winsor & Newton or Holbein, they are going to have slightly different hues, slightly different characteristics. They're not going to be all the same. So now I'm painting wet on damp. So the paint kind of stays pretty much where I want it to stay, but it doesn't have harsh edges. They kind of spreads a little bit gently, right? And I need to darken this side here. So I might need some sort of a little bit of violet on this side, right? And they also smell good. I gotta find the recipe. If you have any recipes, guys, please. See, now I'm breaking that sharp edge with a slightly lighter color, right? And from my point of view, as I move down, this area here gets a little bit darker, right? And so on. So a little bit more of the stem. But you see now I'm proceeding now by layers, right? Layering. It's a technique. You could just mix the right color right away, that color right away, and put it down. That's another technique, right? So what I could do, let me see. I could mix that color there, right, and then block it down, just one brush stroke. And then leave it alone, right? So it really depends on the technique you're using, and they are all fine. That technique, this technique I'm showing you, has a little bit more control because it's not one or two shot. It just can adjust not just the color but also add detail as you paint, right? The red bled in here, so I'm going to take off that. So let's see now if we move here, back in here, right? And I'm going to paint around the seeds in here. See how dark it is there, right? And in here, right? Now this area is not as dark because it catches the light. This I want eventually to lift a little bit, so I'm going to go back with the brush later and lift it. That is still a little bit too wet, so I'm not gonna go mess with this now, right? So now notice one thing. See how this, as it dries, it gets lighter. It gets lighter. So you have to consider that. You have to consider that the paint, the watercolor paint, will look lighter than when it dries, than when you put it down. So you have to allow for that factor. Maybe paint a little bit darker than you think you should. But the other thing of the layering is the advantage of the layering is that you can control this shift in value of the paint for two reasons. Because you get many layers, one over the other one, and you can adjust for that change in value. The other one is eventually with this technique you're going to use less water and move toward the dry brush, and because it has, your paint will have less water in it, that change in value is not going to be so evident, right? So I'm gonna let this dry now for a while. And I'll be back in I would say 15 minutes. We let it dry completely.